Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. After Lai Ching-te became the leader of Taiwan, his plan to hype up so-called diplomatic achievements by transiting through the United States fell through. The U.S. political circles believe that this decision was made by Trump to curry favor with China. Earlier, there were rumors that Lai Ching-te might transit through the United States in August while visiting so-called diplomatic allies. After Beijing raised objections with Washington, the U.S. government has already refused to allow Lai Ching-te to transit through New York on his way to Central America. Lai Ching-te had originally planned to travel through the United States in August to visit Paraguay, Guatemala, and Belize. On July 29, the Financial Times quoted three sources familiar with the matter as saying that the United States informed Lai Ching-te that he could not transit through New York during his trip. Lai Ching-te's spokesperson, Guo Yahui, told the media on Monday that, as always, once Lai Ching-te's travel plans are finalized, they will be announced to the public in due course. Considering the post-typhoon recovery efforts in southern Taiwan, reciprocal tariffs with the United States, and the regional situation, Lai Ching-te currently has no plans for overseas visits in the near future. However, the Financial Times quoted sources familiar with the matter as saying that Lai Ching-te decided to cancel his trip after learning that the United States would not allow him to transit through New York. In addition, Bloomberg also quoted sources on Monday as saying that the U.S. government is discussing whether to allow Lai Ching-te to transit through the United States as planned next week, due to concerns that doing so might disrupt trade negotiations with China and a potential summit with President Xi Jinping. Reuters, on the other hand, quoted sources familiar with the matter as saying that there is no such thing as canceling the trip. In fact, further arrangements will be made for the itinerary later this year. The source said that possible transit locations include Texas and another city in the continental United States. Meanwhile, Taiwan's United Daily News cited sources from the overseas Chinese community, reporting that they had originally received word from the Taiwan side asking them to keep August 4th and 5th available to coordinate with Lai Ching-te's transit schedule, but they have now been informed that Lai Ching-te's trip has been cancelled. According to these sources in the overseas Chinese community, the Taiwan side stated that not only has this visit been cancelled, but Lai Ching-te also has no plans to transit through the United States in the near future. Bloomberg previously reported that when Lai Ching-te planned to visit Paraguay, Guatemala, and Belize, he was scheduled to transit through New York, USA on August 4th, and then transit through Dallas, USA 10 days later. Bloomberg, citing informed sources, said that because Taiwanese officials were unable to obtain approval from their American counterparts, Lai Ching-te's plans changed last week. Bloomberg believes that Lai Ching-te appears to have cancelled his originally scheduled overseas visit for next week. However, Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs argued on Tuesday that Lai Ching-te currently has no overseas visits planned, and there is no situation where the United States has refused Lai Ching-te's transit. Radio France Internationale quoted U.S. officials as saying that, in addition to concerns that a potential Trump-Xi summit could be derailed, some officials also said that the United States needs to hide its strength and bide its time in its dealings with China. This phrase was once used by the late leader Deng Xiaoping to guide diplomatic strategy, and is now being quoted by U.S. officials. Foreign media interpret this as meaning that China's influence in the rare earth sector has limited Washington's ability to take tough action against Beijing. In response to inquiries, the U.S. State Department said that since Taiwan has not announced a trip abroad by Lai Ching-te, the U.S. will not comment on hypothetical questions. A heavyweight in American politics, former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi, shared the Financial Times report on social media, stating that the incident of Lai Ching-te being denied transit through New York sends a dangerous signal, directly pointing out that Chinese President Xi Jinping has once again achieved victories over the U.S. in terms of values, security, and the economy. A reporter asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs whether China had communicated with the U.S. government regarding this matter, specifically requesting that the U.S. not allow Lai Ching-te to transit through the country. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Gui Jiejun responded by first emphasizing that Taiwan is a province of China and that there is no so-called president. He said that China has taken note of the relevant reports, and he wanted to stress that China firmly opposes any form of official interaction between the U.S. and Taiwan, and resolutely opposes the leader of the Taiwan region visiting the U.S. under any name or for any reason. This position is consistent, clear, and unwavering. We hope the U.S. side will abide by the One China principle and the three China-U.S. joint communiques, handle the Taiwan issue prudently and properly, and work together to promote the stable, healthy, and sustainable development of China-U.S. relations. To sum up these reports, there are a few observations. First, Ching-te is using his visit to Central and South America as an opportunity to transit through the United States, and he plans to pass through major metropolitan areas like New York to showcase his so-called diplomatic achievements. This maneuver has definitely happened before. Even the local Taiwanese community has already started organizing events, and it's believed that the U.S. diplomatic authorities have even given the green light. Or perhaps Ching-te was very confident, thinking that since Tsai Ing-wen had previously transited through the U.S., he wouldn't be denied either, which is why this awkward situation of being suddenly stopped has occurred. Second, Ching-te's failure to transit through the U.S. must have been extremely frustrating for him. Third, American politicians really do treat Taiwan as just a pawn. If they need you to transit, they'll let you, and by the same logic, they can also deny you transit. At the same time, it also proves that Taiwanese politicians just want to use transiting through the U.S. to stir things up. If they can't transit through the U.S., they won't even bother visiting countries in Central and South America. Likewise, the U.S. also wants to use Taiwanese officials' transits to provoke mainland China. It's all about using Taiwan to contain China. So whether it's the opposition in Hong Kong or Taiwanese politicians, they're all just pawns for the U.S. to suppress China. Fourth, Trump's desire to meet with President Xi has already taken over his emotions, so he's willing to do a lot of things that the American political establishment sees as heretical or out of line. Of course, China doesn't believe that China-U.S. relations will get back on track just because of this. They're convinced that the U.S. politicians' strategy to contain China hasn't changed. From the Chinese side's perspective, it's important to make good use of this brief period of easing tensions to fully prepare for a tough battle ahead. On the other hand, in order to ease relations with China, including lifting the export restrictions on H-20 chips, Trump's move has made Democratic politicians in the U.S. jump up and down in anxiety. In a letter sent to U.S. Secretary of Commerce Rodriguez on July 27, Democratic members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Anti-China Committee expressed serious concerns about lifting the sanctions on penalized chips. Trump's actions have crossed the line, using security issues as bargaining chips in trade negotiations. An American official admitted that there are serious divisions within the government on how to conduct technological competition with China. On the morning of the 28th, 5 more Democratic lawmakers wrote to Rodriguez, urging him to swiftly reverse these unwise actions, stating that critical technological advantages should not be used as bargaining chips in trade negotiations. The co-signers of this letter included Senate Intelligence Committee Vice Chairman Mark Warner and Minority Leader Charles Schumer. Megan Harris, who served as a National Security Council official during Trump's first term, said that Trump's decision to lift the ban on exporting H-20 chips to China shocked both Republican and Democratic officials responsible for export controls. She said that now every subsequent export control measure is being called into question. Why is the United States doing this? Is it willing to lift these measures after reaching certain agreements? The United States' policy of restricting China's access to American-made computer chips under the guise of national security has long faced international skepticism. Some foreign officials believe that this policy is at least partly driven by U.S. industrial policy, aiming to advance American commercial interests rather than being purely about security concerns. An American official, who wished to remain anonymous, said during discussions of policy details that there are serious divisions within the government over how best to respond to technological competition with China. At present, it appears that the Silicon Valley camp has gained the upper hand over the security hawks. In addition, another anonymous U.S. official said that Trump now hopes to achieve strategic stability with China. Meanwhile, companies like Nvidia are eager to get involved. The official added that Jensen Huang has repeatedly emphasized that selling the H-20 chips would improve bilateral relations. Hundreds of tech executives have said exactly the same thing as Jensen Huang. In addition, according to several sources familiar with the matter, in order to avoid affecting trade negotiations with China and to help Trump facilitate a meeting between the Chinese and U.S. leaders this year, the U.S. government has already frozen technology export controls to China. 8 people familiar with the matter, including current and former U.S. officials, said that in recent months, the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, at the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is responsible for implementing export controls, has been instructed to avoid taking tough measures against China. Some officials also pointed out that, given the possibility of Chinese retaliation, such as restricting exports of critical rare earths and magnets to the U.S., the United States is constrained in its implementation of export controls. Hale, a postdoctoral researcher at Princeton University who studies U.S.-China competition, once believed that during Trump's first term, the focus was more on restricting China's technological development, while in the second term, these policies were increasingly seen as bargaining chips. He thinks that the adjustments Trump might make to his China policy in 2025 would likely draw fierce criticism from the Trump of 2018. The controversies within the United States this time reflect that anti-China politicians in the U.S. are using the opportunity of U.S.-China talks to manipulate security issues, which precisely exposes their growing anxiety. Foreign media have previously noted, why has Trump's China policy shifted from being tough to showing goodwill? On issues such as chip sales to China, Trump's policies have recently undergone a dramatic reversal, and the China hawks are losing ground. The Trump administration, which initially resolved to force China to yield through punitive tariffs, is now instead seeking to draw closer to China, highlighting China's influence on the U.S. economy. Officials from various U.S. government departments have stated that the Trump administration is pausing more aggressive actions against China, while at the same time promoting measures that leave a good impression on China. Of course, Trump's eagerness to be invited to visit China later this year further reinforces the U.S. government's cautious approach toward China.